thought I could come and chair seat.
Good evening, everyone. We'll maybe get the meeting started here. We'll ask them. I think we're organized now with our IT people over here. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for attending tonight to the Senior Property Standards Education session that we're hosting here tonight. For the record, this session is being recorded as our council meetings are for the purpose of transparency and for accountability. So that camera is on, just so everyone is aware. Okay. All right, so my name is Cynthia. I'm Ward 1 Councillor, and to my right is Ward 3 Councillor Bochek. We'll be chairing the meeting together tonight. To our right is our Chief in Boswell and Senior Bylaw Enforcement Officer Dustin Gronc, and our guest speaker for the evening, Karagianis. Apologies, Jamie, if I get that wrong.
Close enough.
Close enough? Okay, good. So the proceedings for tonight, session will be to give you a better understanding of the process and procedures associated with the Clean Yards and Property Standards Bylaw in the Township of Georgian Bay. We're going to start with our Senior Bylaw Enforcement Officer, Dustin Gronc, followed by an information session presented by Dr. Karagianis, and then followed by a question and answer session. So I'm going to at this time invite Councillor Bochek to explain how we actually got to this meeting.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming out. Hopefully the weather stays good and we all get home safely. Basically, in September of 2015, we as councillors were challenged to discuss ways and means to enforce the Clean Yard and Property Standards bylaws, and if needed, that we do at the township level and address the effectiveness of the bylaws and how we can improve the compliance level to the standards expected by our constituents. From this group, consisting of myself, Councillor Bochek, Councillor Cynthia Douglas, Bylaw Officer Dustin Gronc, and our Fire Chief Jim Boswell, we were able to address and identify issues relating to clean yards and the methods of which compliance can be obtained. We will continue to work within this group and report to Council, giving the Bylaw Department the tools and necessary resources needed to have the township be a safe and clean place to live and vacation. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our Senior Bylaw Officer, Dustin Gronc, and I'll give you a little bit of his background. Dustin has completed a 4-year bachelor's degree in Human Services, did his police studies with honors, over 10 years in enforcement experience, 4 years as the township's Senior Bylaw Enforcement Officer and a volunteer firefighter. He belongs to the Municipal Enforcement Officers Association and the Ontario Association of Property Standards Officers. Dustin, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. So first off, I'd like to thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I do hope this information session will be beneficial for everyone. I would also like to explain that this presentation is designed to focus and explain the process of the Bylaw Department and how we follow our own procedures. This presentation will only cover property standards issues, and I want to add that the Bylaw Department does not enforce any building code violations or Planning Act violations. Questions will be welcomed at the end of both presentations, but it will be on process only, and we will not discuss any individual properties. So to begin, the information session will explain and elaborate on the different bylaws used to deal with properties and yard conditions, detail the department's complaint handling procedure, elaborate bylaws roles for regulations and timelines, and explain bylaws limitations, future initiatives, and directions. So starting off, I'm going to explain the Clean Yards Bylaw. The Clean Yards Bylaw was designed for less severe circumstances where enforcement takes a cooperative approach to gain voluntary compliance. Some examples would include long grass, small amounts of refuse, and first-time offenders. The majority of the yard complaints that the department receives are dealt with utilizing the Clean Yards Bylaw. So So I have a picture here that is a good example of a common clean yards contravention that the department deals with quite often. The contravention here would be excessively long grass. This is something we deal with quite often and is a routine procedure for the department. And the picture wasn't taken in the township, this is just something from Google, just to give you a demonstration. So going into the process, after a complaint has been received, there are several steps that are typically followed. Inspection is always completed to confirm and validate the complaint. Inspections typically include initial contact with the property owner and documentation of everything found on the property. An order then would be placed if the contravention was found. The order dictates what is to be cleaned and how long we have to do it. Minimum standards is 14 days from the issue of the order to come into compliance. If the order has not been followed, there is still substantial evidence of the contravention, there's an option for a fine, and the fine is $240. An appearance in court would happen if the owner chose to dispute the charge, failure to comply, or if the officer would like to pursue a higher fine. As a last resort, the township has the opinion or the option of contracting out a company to clean the property. At that point, the bill will be given to the owner. So some challenges and limitations with the Clean Yards bylaw that I commonly face. The specific challenge is distinguishing the difference between definable refuse, garbage, and junk from machinery, working parts, tools, and other household items that are usable. General eyesores and deficiencies that are aesthetically not pleasing cannot always be categorized as something in the Clean Yards bylaw to be forcibly removed. The process can also be lengthy because of back and forth visits, timeline alterations, and minimum standards dictated by the Municipal Act. The process also becomes substantially longer if anything goes to court. So this picture here, again, is an image I found on the internet. It's a good example of a property that does not look good, but there's actually little in contravention of the Clean Yards bylaw. As some of you may look at this, you might feel that it would be a property that would be worth a complaint or something you wouldn't be happy with. But in reality, with the bylaw that I have to use, not much would be actually, I wouldn't actually be able to forcefully get rid of much on that property. There'd be a couple things that I would attempt to tidy, but little of it would actually be classified as contravention. So it's a good, I'd be able to get rid of the shopping cart and maybe some other small things, but that's a good example of something I deal with quite often. So changing to the property standards bylaw. The property standards bylaw generally enforces similar issues, but with more comprehensive of a procedure. It is better equipped to deal with more severe chronic yard issues, and some examples would be large amounts of refuse, garbage, and repeat offenders. A smaller percentage of the yard complaints received would be dealt with using the property standards bylaw. This picture represents a more complicated contravention and would typically require the use of the property standards bylaw. Again, this wasn't taken in township, but kind of is a good explanation and demonstration of how severe some of the issues that I deal with can get. So looking at that one, I'm pretty sure everyone can agree that it is in contravention of something. So the property standards bylaw has a similar process but involves different methods. Orders for compliance that may require a forced cleanup offers an appeal process. The process includes a property standards committee that can adjudicate and make decisions on the status of the property standards order and grant time extensions for cleanup. This process can help protect against negative legal ramifications for the township and ensure due diligence is thoroughly introduced to the process. To use and apply the property standards bylaw, an appeal committee must be in place. This element requires 3 members who understand the provisions of the property standards bylaw and should be considered impartial with respect to their ability to fulfill their responsibilities. Similar to the Clean Yards bylaw, the same difficulty stems from defining acceptable yard conditions. There is a great deal of room for interpretation in the bylaw. Having the appeals committee in place does help with that, the differing opinions on what is in the bylaw and defining what is actual refuse and garbage. And again, timelines can be challenging. The process can be lengthy because of back and forth visits, waiting for an appeal date, a decision, and possible extension due to a variety of reasons. So the next topic I wanted to describe a little better was complaint handling. Typically, the department has accepted any form of complaint for yard issues, and moving forward, the department would actually like to specify and adapt that complaint handling procedure. In the future, the department would only accept written complaints for a yard issue. This follows suit with the building department and will hopefully decrease frivolous complaints and add continuity to the process. The department's standard procedure is to maintain the complainant's privacy by not divulging any information to the public or the offender who has made the complaint. This procedure will remain the same and will be strictly adhered to. When dealing with complaints and concerns, a great deal of time and effort is put into explaining what can actually be dealt with according to the Clean Yards bylaw. All mentioned is also done while maintaining strict adherence to the Freedom of Information policy. So one of the challenges the department faces a lot is when we get a complaint and investigate the yard, we have to go back to the original complainant and explain to them that we've looked into it, but that is all the information we're actually allowed to divulge. That is pretty tricky to deal with sometimes when you're trying to deliver a special, like a level of customer service there. People typically want to know what is exactly going to happen with the property, and that's something I'm not allowed to actually divulge to the public. So just something to be aware of. Adding to the complaint process, this is actually a screenshot from the website. You can see my clicker, I'm not sure if you can, but the actual website is gbtownship.ca, and if you go to contact, this is the page that will actually come up. And if you fill in all the required fields and make sure your complaint is involved in that, this will be sent directly to me. So it's a good way for anyone to lodge a complaint, and it's quite quick. So on top of the other ways that I accept complaints as well. The bylaw department utilizes the compliance-based approach when dealing with contraventions and complaints of fixed yard issues. Voluntary compliance is crucial and should be the main priority. Education of voluntary compliance incorporates working with the property owner to comply with orders, categorize and explain what needs to be done, and offers flexible time limits as long as progress is shown. Stricter enforcement can lead to a loss of cooperation, making a property regress and get worse. Next steps can include advanced charges, forced cleanups, legal proceedings, all of which can be costly and time-consuming with no long-term guarantees for clean yards. So the approach that the bylaw department currently now uses is a compliance approach. We really work with the property owners to come into compliance with the bylaw. That's not saying that a strict enforcement approach isn't used from time to time, but we find there are far more advantages to using a compliance-based approach. Now, as for the differences between the appeals committee versus a working committee, I know we talked about it, that we wanted to explain the difference between them. The Property Standards Appeals Committee would consist of at least 3 members who understand the provisions of the Property Standards bylaw and would be impartial in its application. The Appeals Committee would only meet to hear an appeal of a resident who has an order placed against their property for property standards contravention. The Property Standards bylaw cannot be used for enforcement without having a committee established to allow the appeal process to take place. The Property Standards Working Group was developed through Council's direction, as Mr. Bochek explained earlier, through Council's direction to introduce new initiatives like this information session. The working group only meets to discuss local issues and help develop new solutions or strategies. Councilor Douglas and Councilor Bochek are both part of this working group. So going forward, utilizing the Property Standards bylaw will be very beneficial along with continued compliance. Things like large item pickup has been discussed in the working group, and we're working on other compliance issues and different ways to get compliance. So that's it for my segment, and I'd like to thank you guys again for coming, and we'll answer questions at the end of Dr. Kay's presentation.
Thanks, Dustin. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Jamie Karagianis, to maybe step up and give us a little bit of information session. But before we do that, I would just like to give you some of our guest speakers' background. Dr. Karagianis completed his medical training and fellowship in psychiatry at Memorial University in Newfoundland. And until 2004, he worked in Newfoundland in a variety of hospital and academic positions and operated a private practice. His extensive experience includes positions as assistant professor of psychiatry and director of research in the discipline of psychiatry at Memorial and clinical director at Waterford Hospital. Throughout this time, Dr. Karagianis was immersed in specialty mental health services, including forensic assessments and review boards, emergency and correctional center on-call support, quality improvement, mentoring of students, residents, and physicians, and advocating for people with schizophrenia, receiving the Schizophrenia Society of Canada's Outstanding Achievement Award in 2004. Tonight, we've asked Jamie to come in and speak a little bit about mental health issues that how they may relate significantly to the Clean Yards and Property Standards Act. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Cynthia. I guess in addition to that kind introduction, a couple more things that might be relevant to you is that I work in the office over there across the parking lot, and I'm also psychiatrist in chief at Waypoint, so I recruit psychiatrists to come and work in the area and try to keep mental health a top priority for people in this region. I used to do a lot of talks for pharmaceutical companies, actually speaking all around the world. I've been privileged to see a lot of the world, but I have relocated here because this is probably the most beautiful place that I've been. In spite of the problems with perhaps property standards in some locations, it's still a fantastic place to live, and I love living here. I don't live there, though. My partner is in the audience, Robin. She's there in the white sweater. Robin might say, well, maybe sometimes the house looks a bit like that. And now you have the on the website if you think that my collections are getting a little bit out of hand. But I do tend to keep them on the inside rather than the outside. But what we're talking about here, I think, other than lawn mowing, is probably hoarding. And hoarding is not that uncommon of a disorder. We do see it from time to time. I don't treat a lot of people with it. There we go, just click the button, away we go. Hoarding is a type of obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a subtype of OCD. Have you guys all heard of OCD in the audience? Okay. How many people here have OCD? Raise your hands. Nobody? One, two, a couple. Okay, that's good. We're erasing stigma of mental illness here. Okay, this is all great. And OCD is a type of anxiety disorder. So just to tell you about hoarding, I need to tell you about OCD a little bit first. So an obsession is a recurring, persistent thought or unwanted image or an idea that occurs at least at some time during this disorder. The disorder is perceived as unwanted or it's experienced as unwanted, and it causes distress. And one of the smart quotes I found on the internet about this is an obsession is a word used by the lazy to describe the dedicated. Now, you may or may not agree with that. But usually, at some point during the disorder, the person tries to ignore or suppress these kinds of thoughts or urges or images, or tries to neutralize them by carrying out some kind of an action. And the action is a compulsion. And compulsions are repetitive behaviors or mental acts that the person feels driven to perform in order to try to neutralize some imaginary situation in their mind, or to neutralize the obsession, or to comply with some internal rules of some sort. So these compulsive behaviors are actually designed to reduce anxiety or distress or prevent some dreaded situation, but in reality there really is no connection with what's going on in truth. So examples of common compulsions that people may have include counting things, hand washing, ordering. Now, we have to wash our hands, we have to keep clean, but I'm talking like 20, 30 times a day to the point that the hands get red and sore and dry, for example. Repeating words silently. Some people pray obsessively. Some people like to line things up just so, you know, like that, and can't help themselves. Some of those things are fairly common. But hoarding can also be a compulsion. So these things, in order to meet the definition according to the Bible we have in psychiatry called the DSM-5, it's a Diagnostic and Statistical Classification System. It has to be time-consuming and it has to cause some distress at some point during the condition. Now, sometimes the distress that it causes is more in other people than it is, you know, in the individual themselves, particularly when there's hoarding going on. Sometimes it can occur as part of a substance abuse problem or as part of some other medical condition or even a bipolar disorder, but usually it's a completely separate disorder. And we have here an example of somebody with OCD. It says, "You won't get me to sit on that couch and discuss my obsession until I straighten things up, Dr. Gronc." Always a joke for some element of psychiatry. Other related disorders we have in the obsessive-compulsive type of category include body dysmorphic disorder, where you get preoccupied with a part of your body that you think is abnormally shaped or abnormal size. Trichotillomania, which is an urge to pull out your hair in certain parts. Now, I'm bald quite naturally, and nothing to do with that. We can see here, if you look closely, this person's been pulling out their eyelashes. Skin picking disorder, typically very commonly around the edges of the fingernails, but it can also occur in other parts of the arms or legs or chest or back or anywhere. And hoarding disorder, which that picture is there's so much hoarding going on that you can't hardly even see what's going on. So hoarding disorder is a type of obsessive compulsive disorder. And hoarding disorder, to define it, is persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of how much actual value that those objects have. And typically the value, objectively measured, is pretty low. But to that person it has some value in some way, maybe not necessarily economic value. But there is a need that person has to save these items, and the thought of getting rid of those items produces distress. I mean, they actually feel anxious inside at the thought of getting rid of these things. So this results in the difficulty getting rid of things, results in the accumulation of possessions that congests and clutters the act of living and compromises, in fact, the use of those particular items. It causes clinically significant distress, or it causes impairment in social functioning or occupational functioning or other important areas of functioning, including maintaining a safe environment. So if there's a problem maintaining a safe environment, that's enough impairment of functioning to meet the definition of a hoarding disorder if the other components are there. It may or may not occur with excessive acquisition. So sometimes people are buying things to add to their collections over and over and making it bigger, but in other cases, it's just an inability to throw things away. And things arrive, and the person doesn't have time or interest in getting rid of them or decides that they need to be there for some reason. It may occur along with delusional beliefs, that is a fixed false belief about something. And in this case, it's the belief that nothing is wrong. This is perfectly normal. I can use these things someday. And the last example here is animal hoarding. I don't know if you can see the picture here, but this is a place that's crawling with bunnies. And I actually have a patient who has this kind of disorder. I don't think she lives in this township, but yeah, she objects when people come and start complaining about the smell. So it's out there, and it's not an easy thing to deal with, particularly if the person has limited insight. Reasons for hoarding. Sentimentality. This helps me remember another time in my life. This represents my life. It's part of me. Or I might need this. Or, hey, I think I can fix this thing. You know, one of these days I'll get around to fixing it. Or somebody might be able to use this thing. Or maybe the idea just collecting things that to that person look pretty or look beautiful. And this, you can't even tell what this is, but this is actually a collection of 8 tracks. I mean, how long has it been since anybody actually saw an 8-track? But somebody's collected all these 8 tracks and stuck them on their wall and took a nice orderly picture. You can see how perfectly they're lined up there. Statistics about this condition. Now here's a little bit more about what we're talking about, right? You know, the yards that might look like this with the car wrecks and all the junk lying around. OCD is around 1 or 2% of the population, and about a quarter of people with OCD may have hoarding. These people tend to be single, they tend to live alone. I can't imagine why that might be. I mean, everyone would want to live in a place, you know, where you have so much wonderful objects around. Just kidding. Family history of hoarding and OCD is common among these people. OCD is one of the strongest genetically inherited conditions we see in psychiatry. So if you see it in this person, you're going to probably see it in a family member too. But squalid conditions, that is, this kind of thing, are actually uncommon among those who actually try to get help. So if you see this kind of situation going on, that's not likely to be the kind of person that's knocking on my office asking for an appointment. They need extra motivation. Now, some of this stuff that I'm showing you is stuff that I plagiarized off the internet quite shamelessly. This is one of those slides from the Massachusetts Health Department study. So I Googled it and I found this study of 88 health officers serving almost 2 million residents. 64% of those health officers had at least one hoarding complaint over the past 5 years. 471 cases recorded. More than half of them were repeat cases. And there were complaints by neighbors. Some referrals came from the fire department, the police, social services, and other workers. And the problems included sanitation and fire hazards, odors, just odd behavior, and actually 3 deaths according to house fires. So this is very serious business. And I have a cousin who has a house like one of these. You can't get in the door. The only way you visit her is when she comes out. And sometimes she can't get to the phone because she can't find the phone or can't get through all the clutter, all the boxes and things by the time the phone stops ringing. Animal hoarders are also posing a serious risk in some communities. Love thy neighbor. Which one of these things is not like the other? Can anybody tell me? A hoarder. You probably wouldn't want to live next to the person who's living in the middle, right? And that's why we're here tonight. Kind of money to sort of throw around. And that was repeated a year later for that same person. Repeated visits to the home on some occasions. Other agencies got involved. Only 32% of these individuals were cooperative with the cleanup. 28% agreed but really didn't do very much. And 40% refused to cooperate and had to have involuntary cleanups in this particular study. Very few of the animal hoarders were cooperative because they think that they're doing something good for the animals. They think that they're rescuing these animals or keeping them safe. Elderly clients may be a specific type of person with hoarding disorders. These folks were identified in one study to have medical problems, unsanitary conditions, a risk of falling, and substantially a risk of fire hazards as well. This study looked at the percentage of appliances that were not usable among a sample of elderly hoarders, 62 caseworker interviews of elderly hoarders, and about 60% of them couldn't use the stove or the oven. About half of them couldn't use the fridge or the freezer, and a little less than half couldn't even access the kitchen sink. So we can see the kind of problems. You're looking at the outside, right? But on the inside, things can get pretty bad too. So in order to do something about it, you have to understand the problem of hoarding in the big picture and put it in context. You have to look at how severe the problem is, how easy it's going to be to change. You have to look at the person's motivation to change. And if they don't have much insight, they're not going to have much motivation to change. We can use cognitive behavior therapy, which is known as CBT for hoarding. There's a specific type of CBT that has been shown to be successful for treating hoarding. I'm not a specialist in that, and I'm not looking for business either necessarily, but I'm happy to talk to you about this stuff. And then we have to think about community resources because it really, in many cases, it takes a real team effort to produce any kind of a dent in the situation. You have to think about activities of daily living and to what extent they are impaired by this hoarding disorder. How much does it prevent the preparation of food or the ability to use the fridge or the stove and so on? look at rotten food, insects, and animal feces and things like that inside the place, and the fire hazards, the inability to get out if there's a fire, and certainly there's enough things lying around when people collect papers and boxes and things, and they might be smoking, I mean, the place can go up in a flash, right? Treatment, it can be multidimensional, and lots of different types of approaches can be used. Motivational interviewing is an important part of it, where you try to engage that person to really want to change, help them think, well, maybe you can make some money by giving some of this, or by selling some of this stuff away, or maybe you can help another person by giving some of these possessions away. They may need help developing problem-solving skills, or help making decisions, help with organizing. A lot of these people have ADHD, and they just get distracted. They get busy doing one thing, and they're too busy to throw stuff away. So treating the ADHD may also help with this condition. One of the psychological methods of treatment involves gradual exposure to sorting and discarding concepts, just getting them used to that idea, because even the whole thought of sorting things and throwing it away can just make people have palpitations if they have this disorder. And then cognitive therapy can have, in some cases, response rates close to 70%, and medication can also be helpful. But medication and therapy, all these things, the person has to cooperate. You can't give somebody treatment against their will. It brings me back to the old favorite joke about psychiatry. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So it's very much for hoarding and lots of things we treat in psychiatry. Now, this particular slide came from the internet there. One of the folks that were trying to come up with a program to help with hoarding had a task force, and the members of the task force included members of the public health department, social services, the housing authorities, the mental health services, the courts, public safety folks like the firefighters and the police, and various volunteers who were interested. And this task force, in this particular case, tried to evaluate the threat that was associated with the hoarding problem, and looked at possible legal directives that might help, tried to develop a case plan for each individual case, and then had to implement that plan and maybe make modifications along the way, and continue to monitor, because it's not like this is a one-time thing. Almost always, unless that person gets really good treatment, they're going to relapse again, and the problem's going to continue. So there may be official pressure needed to be applied by specifying the particular infractions that have occurred in the bylaws, and you may give the person a timeline for compliance. Here, you have to do this by such and such a particular time, and maybe come up with some resources that will help with getting rid of that stuff. You have to figure out who's going to monitor the outcomes, who's going to say, yeah, okay, this is good enough, or no, that's not good enough, and you have to give clear consequences for not going along with this, and that may be fines, or it may be being charged with the courts and so on. You're probably going to have to negotiate with the person at some point to say, well, let's start small, clear the top of the stove by next week, or remove perishable food by next Thursday, or get that wreck towed out of your driveway by the end of the month. You have to give some specific deadlines for specific things. That may be helpful. That's about as much as I could say about it. I'm not an expert in this condition, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Sure.
Jamie, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you for Jamie for bringing this up, because this is part of, I think, our problem in the township that maybe our bylaw enforcement is dealing with. And just to give us all a little bit of a better understanding of problems associated with that. And for questions, I think Councillor Bochek is just going to give you a bit of a little feature on that prior to our questions going out.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Not that I want to step on your toes, Jimmy.
You want to sit down, or?
You have a seat for a second.
I think the questions will probably come from the entire panel.
It looks like we're moving along quite rapidly. We didn't plan on being at this point till about 8 o'clock, but I think what we should best do is move into the question and answer period. And just, I want to touch on a few things. We do have procedures here to do with this committee, and I'd like to impress on you to follow the procedures. It's very important to understand the rules moving forward to the question and answer period. We would like you not to make reference to any specific properties or any specific property owners. For the purpose of the question and answer is for clarity as it relates to property standards and clean yards and the bylaws attached. If you care to ask a question, simply put your hand in the air. We will note that you have a question, and we will ask you to address your questions directly to a member of the panel. And if your question does not get answered, please feel free to put your hand up again and ask a supplemental question if you didn't get clarity on your first question. And perhaps if the person you asked the question to was unable to answer your question correctly, you may choose to have another member of the panel interact and answer that question for you. So the question period will basically end when the last question is answered, and feel free to ask questions of any of us. And if you don't, I will.
This is sort of a, I just wonder if you can clarify for me. It strikes me that the hoarding behavior would be something that might be encountered in the context of the enforcement of property standards, more so than in the context of the enforcement of clean yards. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that's completely correct, actually. Through the presentation, I was trying to distinguish the difference, and clean yards is usually something that's less severe, just like the lawn grass. There's the little amounts of garbage or first-time offenders. I would agree with you completely that a situation where I might think that the person might have hoarding tendencies would definitely be categorized as a property standards issue.
So can I ask a supplemental question?
Sure.
So, and Dustin, what resources do you have available to you then if you feel that what you're dealing with is hoarding? Until
now, I don't really have a lot of resources that I've been utilizing. I think maybe tonight's a good opportunity for me to talk to Dr. Karagianis on blood protocol. I've been just trying to utilize the clean yards bylaw as best as I can. The property standards bylaw still has not been able to be implemented, so we have an appeals committee. So I use the clean yards bylaw as best as I can and get as much results out of the situation as possible. But it's just a reoccurring situation. I'm spending a lot of time at these properties, and I'll get progress, and then it will regress, and I'll just have to keep coming back.
Looking at the information that Dr. Karagianis presented, in those instances where you're successfully dealing with hoarding behavior, there's a multi-agency approach, if you will, and it's not just the enforcement of the bylaw, but there is actual support to help change the individual's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And that's way beyond your scope, I would think.
I agree, and with the working committee that we've established, I feel like that might be a target area for us to focus on and build upon, and maybe implement some type of procedure to follow when we've identified a situation where there's hoarding or something like that.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in a little bit on that too, just because we didn't address some of the things that are going to be coming out of this, and that is, one, there will be an appeal process where there will be a adjudication process where if Dustin is not having a response or not getting any response, there will be a process where the person can defend themselves in front of a panel, which will be held here, and at that point in time a decision will be made. And that decision may be that we have to make a referral or get outside help to intervene. So that will be part of the process, because there's so many layers and so many steps. Once it's not as simple, can you clean that up, and they cleaned it up, but things that are ongoing will come in front of the hearing process, and then from there we'll make a decision on where we have to go to get enforcement. So that's coming in the near future. That committee has not been selected as of yet. It's very close. We have a chair, we don't have members. Right. We're sourcing out one more member. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but
My
let's
name's
start over. Becky?
Jackie.
Jackie, hi Jackie.
Hi. So, the property standards bylaw and the clean yard bylaw, they're totally separate?
Yes, they are.
They are separate?
They are completely separate
And
bylaws.
so I didn't realize that. So what you were saying is that the property standards bylaw is the piece where, in order to really enforce anything, you had to have the appeals committee in place.
Correct.
And because the appeals committee has not ever been in place, you've had no way to enforce it.
Correct.
And that's been going on for some time.
Correct.
So that has been what you've been using then is the clean yard bylaw?
Correct.
Does it have any mandated appeal committee or anything?
No, it doesn't. And the purpose for the clean yards is more minor, and then property
Yeah.
standards is good because of that appeal process.
Mhm.
The clean yards is there, it still has some authority where you can forcefully clean and charge, but it opens the township up to legal, negative legal ramifications sometimes. Without that appeals process, there would be an issue that there wasn't enough done to represent the person who's in contravention of the bylaw, and that's where the property standards is much more, it's got a better procedure for dealing with that.
We have some teeth in that.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's right in the bylaw, so you have to have that in place before you can enforce it.
That's correct.
Yeah. All right, that's, so up until now, if anyone has had a yard that has been, say, filled with vehicles and stuff not working, and or if a building's been falling down and in obvious repair on the outside, never mind the inside, you really, up until now, had no real teeth. You had no real, you could tell them, but if they didn't do anything because that appeals process wasn't in place, you couldn't really go any farther.
Basically, yes. The clean yards bylaw we have utilized as a compliance-based approach, and there are charges, but sometimes they're not enough to encourage someone to do it, and we are lacking the ability to forcefully clean up the property. As for structural issues where the property was falling down, that's all a building code issue. But I can't really answer too many questions on.
Well, I think it still comes under the property standards, which is under the building code, right? And under the property standards, if it's not safe and not safe, for instance, for services to go in there if there was a fire, et cetera, I think that's still under the property standards.
Yes, it is under the property standards.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I may be able to assist in that a little bit too. We do have, Dustin is our chief bylaw officer. He's the #1 guy. We do have other bylaw officers within the township. They are located in the building department, they're located in the planning department. If there's a building code infraction, our chief building inspector is also a bylaw officer and can address issues directly related to building infractions, at which time Dustin and our CBO would get together and work on it together.
Mm-hmm. I think too, with regard to the committee that was just struck now, I think in some places they have things like hoarding or mental health issues, that interventions and that, panels of interventions are set up as opposed to having to have lots of people. Anyway,
And that is part of the committee that's being struck in the appeal process. Once this is in place, then we have, again, to use lack of a better term, we have the teeth to really sink in on this and be able to start to do something constructive in a way of getting things done.
And this is really just the beginning of trying to pull it together. I mean, just by virtue of the complaints that we've had and speaking to constituents about this and residents, we've realized that we do need to take a look at our process and have this working group put together just to see what we can do, what we can add, how we can, obviously it is multi-layered, perhaps the bylaw needs to be looked at, that we are able to give the tools to our bylaw enforcement department, something a little bit more lofty to work with, and also look at the fact that we're dealing with, in some cases, mental health issues. And we're not really trained to deal with that in the bylaw enforcement area. So that's something else that we're going to try and address and see if we can't find some solution to that with working together with our mental health experts in the field and see what we can actually do to bring some groups together to try and move forward with that. It is a very difficult situation, I think, for the particular properties that are an ongoing problem because you have to have cooperation from them. You can't just go in and I could be corrected on that. You may be able to, but I think you'd be opening yourself up to a lawsuit. Most certainly, if you get rid of something and they could say it was worth, it was my grandmother's and it was worth a lot of money, it's a problem. And I think that's been, a precedent has been set with that, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Next. Anne-Marie, I've seen your hand up in the air.
Kind of segues into, I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but is this problem more prevalent or challenging in a rural setting like we are, because it's not really a mental health issue, more their rite of passage, that they've been here historically, they live in the bush, that we've cityfied their properties. It's not, they might view it that we're imposing our standards on them, and they've been here for many generations, and it was perfectly fine to have smoking down snowmobiles and everything in your front yard that never went anywhere, and we're the ones that are wrong. Is that a big challenge in this area?
I have faced that challenge quite a bit. I'd say it's like a mindset, mentality. It doesn't really excuse them from being in contravention, but it does. It is a big challenge for them because there are a lot of properties with that mentality. So,
I guess the only point I'm trying to make is maybe it's not mental illness as much as they have a history here. It's just a different way of that they've been raised here. Their culture was different from the onset, and maybe we need to go at that problem in a little bit different way.
I know what you mean, but I still say there are both. There are people that have the mentality that they would not like to change the property. Situations like Dr. Karagianis explained, that it truly falls into the boarding category, and it's much more complicated than what my bylaw is able to deal with.
I think until you get a look inside the house, it'd be probably pretty hard to say for sure.
And we've had to deal with this, and our committee has talked about this at quite length. The rite of passage, or somebody having the feeling that they were here before the township was an organized township. They were carrying on their business as usual before we interrupted them and created bylaws and created a second-tier government to interfere with their way of life. So yes, very true. This is something that does happen, and for the most part, and Dustin can attest to this, a lot of compliance in those cases is reached not by giving an order to clean up or fining. It's simply by speaking to them, getting them to understand where their property needs to be to make everybody happy. And I think you get fairly good compliance. I probably wouldn't be going out on a limb to say that 90% of the compliance in the Clean Yard Act is done by communication with the person one-on-one and figuring out a resolve to the issue at hand. Yeah. But you're right, there is a right to entitlement, and some people are not too happy about being told what to do by a municipality.
And I think our CEO would like to speak to this maybe as well.
In my experience, I think it's both, because I've worked in bigger urban centers, and in my last center we had a fire death from a hoarder because the fire department couldn't get in, and it was pretty urban. And we had a clean and clear order, which the municipality spent $120,000 to clean a property 8 years ago. They're still in court, and the property has gone right back to where it is. So whether the township ever gets the money is unlikely, which is why we try and move the education and the compliance. The hard approach is not beneficial to anyone in the long run.
Yes.
Adam, moving forward from Anne-Marie's question there, what can you actually do, Dustin, in regard to the situation where there are, X amount of snowmobiles or other actually physically remove them, or some sort of lengthy process that goes nowhere?
With the property standards bylaw in place with the committee, we would be able to technically be able to remove if it's definable refuse or machinery that's not operable, we would be able to remove it.
You guys, someone said that they're actually working on it.
There are some complications, but that's where I'm hoping the appeals committee would actually, if they were to appeal, and the appeals committee were to decide that it was still something that would be in contravention, then we would go forward with that decision made.
Okay, so moving back a little bit, would you only respond to a written complaint, or would you also tour the areas and look for situations that are in contravention to the bylaws?
So, previous to this time, I've been only reacting to complaints, and that's typically how we'll go forward. I need a written complaint from someone explaining that there is an issue, and that's when I'll do the inspection.
Okay, so you really need a name with a complaint to move forward?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, in saying that, there's Privacy Act issues here that are in place. So I think the form on our internet site does ask for your complaint and does ask for your name. That name falls under the Privacy Act. Your name falls under the Privacy Act. And it wouldn't be given out to the public. And Dustin, can you elaborate on that? Because we did talk quite extensively.
Yeah, it's something that we are strictly, we adhere to all the time. The complainant's name is never disclosed to the offender or in any discussion like that. It's always kept private for our own files, and that is it. It is never discussed with the offender at all. So whoever complains can always ensure that their name will be kept private and will not be discussed with anyone involved in that situation.
Dustin, can I just ask a question on that one?
Yeah.
Can someone put a complaint in anonymously?
Moving forward, I'd like not to. It's following suit with the building department, and it does help eliminate frivolous complaints. I have had to deal with a lot of anonymous complaints when gone through and there was nothing contravention or it was a neighbor dispute. I do have to act as a referee with a lot of situations, so usually having a name and a complete file for the person complaining really helps eliminate that.
Okay, thank you.
The experience will dictate that if you phone up and say, I want to complain with my neighbor, but don't tell them, chances are we're a small town, they're going to know who complained.
Go ahead, Steve.
If, question to Dustin and maybe to the two councillors, if you're on the township payroll as a full-time staff, why does your job have to be complaint-driven, and why can you not investigate on it? If you're out traveling and you see something that doesn't meet our standards, why can you not investigate? Because you're being paid full-time to do your job.
I will add to start with it's your right and your privilege to contact your area councillor and inform your area councillor that there is an issue with a clean yard or a Property Standards Act, and we will address it from a councillor's point of view. As far as the question of the bylaw officer not waiting for a complaint-driven request, but to actually pursue it himself, I'll leave that one to Dustin. Or to Jim.
And I'll just go back in a little bit of history, with the department. Until 4 years ago, basically bylaw was one person, one seasonal person. When we decided to bring on one full-time person, we got into stuff like, he does other things like parking, animal control. The other thing we had to look at is, and what we utilize in wintertime, is a lot of these bylaws are probably from the 80s, early 90s, that need to be updated. So being only a department of one, that's alone, basically, I'm the supervisor, but we have to review these bylaws. It takes time. So in all, we don't have enough resources to actually just get in the vehicle and do those patrols. Now, if we're out and we see something, usually Dustin will come back and mention it to me, and we will either give somebody a call. But the routine of patrol really doesn't happen. And then we will discover some of these in the summertime we have 2 students commit. Now, they're not as educated with the township maybe or whatever, but basically this is the level of service that we provide right now, and it was set by council, and this is what we do right now.
So that's what I'm trying to say. If he's out on a dog complaint and the property that he's responding to is just not up to standards, then he should have the power in his own job description to go ahead and file a complaint.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that would take place.
No, that's not what
I would like to add, there are situations where I've been on a property, and if I know it's contravention that I'm already dealing with the property, I would bring it up, and I would create my own file through it, but I don't proactively look for properties, if that's not part of my description, to proactively look for these properties and start that investigation.
No,
Is that more what you're...
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay.
Can I check? Go ahead.
With regard to your procedure now, so how it's going to happen is you'll get a written complaint, and does it go directly to you when it comes in to the office? Like, say someone emails, does it go directly to you?
So if you email me directly, it will come to me. If you fill out the complaint form online, it goes to our clerk, and she forwards it to the corresponding person who would accept that complaint.
Okay,
Which would directly be me after that.
And does that person, the person who accepts the complaint, does that person log the complaint and say when it came in, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, there's like a timestamp involved with that.
And then it goes to you.
Yeah, and it's quite quick. It's a pretty automated system.
And then you get the complaint and you read it and you assess, well, do you follow up every complaint that you get?
Yes, I do.
And first of all, you follow it up, and once you follow it up, say if you're doing it, I guess, under the Clean Yards Act, you probably aren't going to make any kind of formal order, are you?
There are still formal orders with the Clean Yards Act.
So when you go out that day to follow up the complaint, you bring your formal order form with you?
No, typically what I would do is do the initial inspection. That's where I'd contact the property owner, explain that there's been a complaint, and I'm inspecting the property under the Clean Yards bylaw, and that's when I document everything on the property. And then I'd go back, create the order on what evidence I found there, and then the order would be placed on the property.
And you do that? Obviously, you take your, do you have a time frame from this, or I guess you do it as soon as you can?
As quickly as I can, yes.
And then they have 14 days to comply?
Correct. So that 14 days is the minimum amount of days that they have dictated by the Municipal Act. That timeline that I give them for that order can vary, depending on if they're a first-time offender, depending on the severity of the situation, depending on any other types of conversation I've had with the property owner. Because the process is designed to be fair as possible too. Typically, these properties didn't get messy in 14 days, so 14 days isn't always enough for someone to clean.
Sure. And even like within that 14 days, you could have discussion and, of course,
Correct.
Okay, so then you get to the point where you do have a day where you say to them, okay, this date or else. Is that, and then at that time, you advise them that they have, how many days do they have to appeal, for instance? Because you have this appeal committee. So how many days from the last date do they have, how many days do they have to appeal?
So, speaking to the property standards order, they'd have 14 days to appeal that order.
Okay.
So within that timeline of the 14-day cleanup, they have also that time to appeal. So once the appeal date will come, and they've applied for that, they have 30 days, we have 30 days to give them that appeal process. And after that, then they have their regular timeline, whatever the committee decides on. Sometimes with the committee, they can grant an extension or confirm the order as is.
Sure. But within 30 days, the committee has to hear them.
Yes. So now with backing into the Clean Yards bylaw, at the end of the 14th, typically a charge would happen at that point.
Because there's no appeals committee for that, yes.
So-
So then just a fine or
Yes.
something, whatever it is you're going to do, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm the daughter of two hoarders, not in the municipality. They passed away and basically I'm left cleaning up their house. So every cardboard box they ever owned is in there and everything else. I think part of it is the mentality of World War II. We might need it. I think that was a big part of it. But anyway, cut to the chase, I'm clearing out huge amounts of stuff, and I'm having to deal with how do I get rid of it. And one thing that would be really helpful would be being able to dump a large amount of stuff, others like in a pickup type of thing, instead of having to hire a bin at my expense, being the descendant of when I'm cleaning things up. Or if somebody's moving, just being able to dump a lot of stuff. Or the kids of hoarders, like working with them. I was doing things gradually with my dad while he was still alive, getting him to throw out like old theater things and stuff like that. And so he was gradually learning to do it, and over a period of a couple of years, he managed to get rid of a lot of stuff, but there was still a ton of stuff left. So if there is a way that the municipality could support, like just in general, like everyone gets saved when times when they like clean up their garage. If we could just have maybe a once a year a dumping day, whatever we can carry, and have it free of charge, that would really help a lot of people out. Like let's not forget that a lot of these hoarders are the vulnerable, like the elderly. Fixed money, hiring a bin, a few $100s, $1,000, that's a lot of money for them. And to throw out garbage, to pay to throw out garbage is like a contradiction for a lot of people. So if we could maybe have, like per property, like being able to get rid of a certain amount, a certain weight. And so that's one thing. And if you're, so take care of the vulnerable. There are a lot of vulnerable, the poor. They can't afford to get the bins, whatever. So if you could take that into account. And also, if you do have to resort to more drastic measures, like cleaning the sites out at the municipality's expense, can we have it so that when the property is sold, the money is like a lien or something that is registered? After trying to work with family and stuff like that. Like family and, the offspring of the elderly can help assist with trying to get rid of stuff. But after we've gotten through that, and if we still have to go through, an expensive dump, put a lien on the property. So when it's sold, you get paid back. I think that's fair to everybody. We kind of try to work many things at once, trying to get it going.
This is exactly what we wanted to hear. This is why we had this public forum. Within our township, being a small township, we do things a little bit different here when it comes to large item pickups or collection of large garbage. We do supply that service to our offshore island owners. Once a year we bring in the bins and allow them to bring whatever they want. We don't have a heavy day pickup through the year. However, we do open our land transfer stations at certain times of the year where our residents, our ratepayers, can bring whatever they would like and dump for free. Of course, the timelines on that are not conducive with the timelines of cleaning up a yard. We've made notes on what you've said, and it's probably one of the most valuable things coming out of tonight. And we will bring this up. Trust me on that one. We will bring it in front of council, and we will try and have a resolve for that. I think it's a very good idea. I think the amount of money that's spent in the bureaucratic process sometimes supersedes the amount of bringing a bin in and dumping it on the front lawn and allowing them to to throw their stuff in there at no charge. So we've heard what you've said, and I want you to be reassured that we're going to act on that. And that's exactly what we were looking for coming out of this meeting. Thank you.
And one other thing, like, how do you get rid of plain old boats? An old RV or something? How do you get rid of this stuff?
That's a really good question, actually, and that is asked an awful lot, and I think we've been asked that many, many times because we have a lot of little boats sitting around marinas and people's properties that they have no idea where to get rid of them. And actually, I'm going to put this one back to you guys because, you know, this is a question we do get asked a lot. Is this something that you can help us with to answer?
With where boats are going.
Well, where do you get rid of them? Yeah.
You can take a car to the wrecking yard and get a couple $100 and they'll charge you $50 to dump it. Boats are made of fiberglass, nobody wants them. We did have a small program here set up a few years ago where you brought your boat in and it was crushed. All the metal was taken off of it and salvaged, and then your boat went through a big grinder and it was grinded up into a pulp, and then that pulp was going to be used for the manufacture of something. It was going to be reused in another process. It was very costly. The independent business that was doing this found it not to be economically feasible to do, and he closed it down, unfortunately, because it was a great avenue. We have to also understand that refuge, that garbage, that boat wasn't built here. It wasn't usually even purchased here. It was brought up from Ohio, or brought up from Kingston, or brought up and left here in our township. So that creates even a different problem. So again, these are things that need to be addressed and looked at, and we don't have an answer currently, and this has been an ongoing concern of the township for quite some time, what to do. Short answer is, if you really want, you can take, if it's an aluminum boat, you can take it and fold it up, and as long as it's not more than 8 feet in length, you can take it to the land transfer station. And boats, I believe, up to 14 feet can be taken there, but it's very costly to dispose of.
What Brian's saying here, I think part of the working group is going to address some of these things, so it's really important that we hear from you guys on these issues. This is one issue that I think we'll put on the board to discuss sooner rather than later, because it is a big concern. And I think it's finding the resources of people to come and get them. There are people out there that will come and pick up boats because they will strip them down and make money for them, but we have to, find that resource. And so maybe that's part of something that we can do in our working group, is address that. I've actually had two old boats picked up from somebody last year from someone, so I actually have someone on that one. Good question. Armin.
Thanks, Cynthia. One of the things that you might want to consider doing is, and this boat thing is a big problem. We have 2 or 3 fiberglass boats in our yard that I really don't know what to do with. I was hoping that Don, the fellow that had that fiberglass recycling business, unfortunately didn't work out, and I was always intending to take them down to him. But I think, what a tub grinder is, that the big grinders that they use are mounted on a tractor trailer, and they'll go in at a subdivision and they throw entire tree stumps in there, and it grinds everything up to dirt, and you name it, and it kind of spits it out. So I think it would probably pay the municipality to have a week or something, where week or 2 week period where everybody can bring the boats in to the transfer station and hire one of these tub grinders, get a subcontractor to bring them in and grind it all up and put it in a bin and just get rid of it. Because everything's so bulky. That's always been my bugaboo with waste management dating back over 30 years ago is, I think when you see the amount of recycling equipment that's running around, all these brand new beautiful trucks that they've got now, pretty high tech, they're probably worth $1 million a truck or something, and they're running around with a lot of air in their hoppers, where if you had a compactor or you had something that would break the glass or crush the aluminum, you could crush it into something that's usable for other purposes. And I think that the tub grinder is probably the best way, or some way to either crush it up mechanically, or one of these tub grinders will certainly grind fiberglass boat up in a heartbeat. So there's lots of different technology out there.
We might We'd like to have a conversation with you on that, Armin,
Yeah,
just to take back to our group, to find some solutions, because it is obviously a very big problem in the township here.
yeah, everybody's got, you know, you go to
Yeah.
Marina's got tons of
Yeah.
them, right? And I don't really know what to do, and I tried to give them, a couple of the boats could be salvaged if somebody wanted to do,
Right.
the work on them, you know, that, it's a common problem, not just in this township, but I wanted to congratulate you for doing what you're doing, because this has been long overdue. We've had if my memory serves me correctly, about 30 years ago, we established a property standards bylaw, and I don't think anybody ever acted on it. And it's been that long.
Well, thank you for that. We've recognized it, and we're hoping to address it in a real positive, way to move it forward to perhaps things need to be changed with the bylaw. It'll be something that we're looking at. I think we've already discussed that some of the bylaws are old, and possibly I think we have to give our bylaw enforcement department more tools to work with. And I think at this point they haven't had the tools or are missing parts, or maybe we need to change things. And that's what we're hoping to establish. And this is just the beginning of where we're going to go with this, is getting some input from the public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were, 10 or 12 years ago, Henry and I had the opportunity to go to a real estate conference in St. John's, Newfoundland, and we spent a couple of days driving around the countryside there, and it's very similar. It's very rural, very, maritime feeling, and, some communities were remarkably clean, despite the fact that people obviously didn't have a lot of money, and there was even if I remember correctly, there was like a contest, and it had something to do with clean and clear contest or something, and this particular community was the lucky winner, and they had a big sign up, and, they were pretty proud of themselves, and they should have, because they did a really great job cleaning up their community, raised the morale of everybody in town, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, it's nice to see that happen around here, and we have houses that are falling down with tarps on the roof.
Yeah, for sure. I think trying to engage our communities as well is going to be really pivotal to being successful here. Like you said, there's concepts that were put together possibly by the township or by a community group. And one thing that I think that, I think that we'll start speaking to our communities about is, because our land transfers do offer 3 days where you can take garbage, the problem sometimes stems from some of the elderly people that don't have any way to get it there, or they don't have family or sons, or and this is where I might, like to see the community step up, and perhaps somebody's got a pickup truck that that you could help them and get it out of there. And I think it's going to be a joint effort here, between the actual public as well as our township, to try and be successful with this.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the levels of service that are expected from our constituents have to be in relationship to the costs involved. And of course, everything that the township does has a cost attached to it, and guess who pays that cost? It's us. We don't have a high level of industry, we don't have a high level of anything outside of seasonal residential and residents, and they pay the bill for everything. So I would like to see a little more community-oriented programs where don't rely on the municipal government to do everything. We need to get back a little bit to say, my neighbor's got a dirty yard and he's been trying to clean it up for months. Maybe I'll arrange to get a pickup truck and give them a hand. But we need more of that happening, because anything that the township does in the way of helping out, there's a cost that's associated to it. And not that it isn't going to happen, it's just nice that we see it to happen, a combination of both, municipal government and a good, caring community.
I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit, Brian. Last year we had a complaint that came through Facebook for one of our lakes in the area here. And it was a complaint about garbage and old building materials being thrown on Crown land on the lake. And there was a lot of people complaining about it, and rightfully so. And from that generated exactly that. There was a cooperation between the township, who provided a bin for the lake, and one of the contractors and volunteers from the lake. And it all happened at the level of the community. Facebook is a wonderful tool in that respect, where there you had a complaint come forward, and people, immediately jumped on there. One of the contractors came on and offered a barge, And people showed up from the lake and actually helped load everything on, and the township provided the bins. So that's a perfect example of how this could happen in every community. So we're just have to structure it in a way that we need to put it out there to the community to try and make some of this work.
Got a hand that's been up there for quite a while.
Thinking about the disposal of these large items, the trailers, the boats, whatever, this municipality isn't the only one dealing with that challenge. And as a municipality, you're part of the district. What resources does the district of Muskoka have available to help, not just this township, but the 6 townships that are part of the district in dealing with that kind of challenge? Because I'm quite sure that the 6 municipalities in the district of Muskoka are all dealing with this.
Well, let me take that one, and I will answer the way a fellow colleague of mine that sits beside me at the council chambers would state it is, maybe we need to look at the other townships within the municipality and ask the question, what are you doing? How are you addressing this problem? One of the best resources is to find out what other people are doing to deal with the issue. And that's something that we'll take from here as well too. As you know, district is responsible for the garbage collection in our township. It's not a township thing that we take care of. It's taken care of through the district of Muskoka. So I will impress upon our district councillors, Councillor Peter Cooper and Councillor Paul Bianco, as well as our mayor, to bring this topic up at district and start to get some answers of how other townships within the municipality are dealing with this. That's a very good question, and thank you for it.
Yeah. And if I may,
sure.
I think the other piece is, landfills are they have a lifespan, and they're a finite resource. We need to become, as a society, we need to become more creative in terms of disposing of these kinds of things. If in fact the district is able to present this as a real-life challenge to an engineering faculty somewhere, I mean, they run contests, like real-life problem-solving contests at all of these engineering schools. I mean, here's a perfect opportunity for some of our bright young minds to come up with something that would be useful to all of us.
Very good point, Marguerite. Yeah.
Thank you, Marguerite.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Next.
I have another question.
Bring it on.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
I promise this is the last one.
No.
I found the conversation about the appeals process confusing. And so I'm somebody who has a hoarding problem. You tell me I have to clean up, and I basically tell you to go to hell. I'm not appealing anything. I'm just telling you no. So how does the appeals process kick in here?
Okay, I'm going to refer this to Dustin. We didn't really explain much about the appeal process at all. The appeal committee will be made up of 1 chair, and then, Lori, help me with this, three other members of the community, 4 other members of the community, not a municipal employee or a councillor, but we will take applications for this hearing board so that we have representation from the coastal area, from the Mactier area, from the inland lakes area, and say from the Honey Harbor Port Center. We'll try and have the committee, or the judicial committee set up so that it is a fair and balanced process. Okay? Now, when you say Dustin has gone out and investigated something and he's come across a situation of hoarding, and he addresses it and asks for compliance, and the person says, no, I'm not interested. Justin, where do we go from Dustin? It's the hair. It's the hair. It's the Justin Bieber thing.
So I think there's 2 different ways to answer that. If it's an issue where we've actually identified hoarding as the primary cause of what's the problem,
and maybe it's not hoarding. But bottom line, I'm saying
If
no.
we're disregarding that it's wording and they're just saying no, then after the 14 days that have come up through the order, then we would move forward with cleaning up the property.
So there's no appeal there, because
If they don't appeal the order, then they're confirming that the order is in place,
Yeah.
and they've waived their rights to appeal the process. So we've still done our due diligence by not offering that process to them, and we'd be more protected legally,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the township isn't going to appeal anything, it's
No,
the individual who has this thing levied that has to appeal it.
Correct.
And if they don't, the appeals process doesn't kick in.
Correct.
Okay.
And to add to that, I know there's been I've received some emails about, well, why don't we just get the OPP involved? Why don't we call the police and have the police take care of it? And I spoke to the detachment commander, Andrew Ferguson, and he enlightened me a little bit that if the police do get involved, their only involvement would be to, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be to act as a witness on behalf of the bylaw officer. Because this is a bylaw within the township district, and it's not a provincial offense, they would simply act as a witness and could not do anything to help us. Okay? And that all falls into that appeal process too. Once, if the person in question does not make an appeal to the appeal board, then basically they've said, I'm not appealing it, you're right.
Okay.
And then Dustin can move forward. That's what we're here for.
So Dustin, the person that just said no, they're not going to remove their boats and their RVs and whatever, and you give them a ticket after 14 days for $240, what then? They still haven't removed anything.
So if you're referring to the Clean Yards bylaw, I haven't had an issue where someone just straight up said no. I've always had some cooperation, that whether it be little or a lot, I've always been able to get some compliance. Moving forward, if we get the property standards bylaw working the way it's supposed to, that is where we would contract out another company to clean up the property. And that's where we do a three quote system, and that's when someone
And failing that, we hire a contractor, they still refuse to pay, we have the ability to just add it to the taxes. And if the property is ever sold, we collect our money.
and that's utilizing the property standards bylaw.
I think the property standards bylaw is, when it becomes in effect and it's used, it gives the bylaw department another avenue to go down, a better avenue to walk down to get compliance. Let's put it that way. It's not just as simple as, I told you to clean it up, you didn't clean it up, now here's your fine, and the person throws the fine in with the rest of the garbage on his front yard. The property standards bylaw is going to have some teeth, and it's going to have some grit, and it's going to be able to solve the issues we haven't been able to solve up to this point, or at least attempt to solve.
So, a very simple black and white question. What stage are we at with passing this bylaw, and how long before we expect to see any action take place?
So the bylaw is in place. It's the committee that we're waiting on, and as Lori confirmed, I think we're waiting on one more member to be part of that appeals committee. So once they're together, then that's when we'll be able to utilize the bylaw. So timeline, I don't know if you want to speak to that, Lori.
Sure, in the next month or two. It came to council last month, and they appointed 2 members of the committee, I believe, plus the chair, but we were looking for a member from each ward, and so the 2 wards that we were missing, the ward councillors were tasked with finding a member that wants to volunteer. So I understand they found one, maybe speaking to him in the audience, I'm not sure, and we have 1 more councillor that we need to work with to get a representative from this area. We'll come back and constitute the committee and go from there.
So would it be fair to say we're going to see action this summer? Clean up?
I guess it depends how you define action. If we go back to the idea that compliance is better than fines and orders, you go back to the properties where we can definitely get to the clean and clear stage, but when you do, then the voluntary compliance stops. So it's complicated.
Up until this point, without having this committee in place, without having our focus group that we have now, an ad hoc group, whatever you want to call it, to come up with these methods, until we get the hearing side of this slated, where we have the members and we have the forum for it, then the bylaw officer can go out and start to work with this Property Standards Act. Until that's in place, that can't happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all really pushing to get this done as quickly as possible. The feedback we receive from the constituents in the township is better now than later. Let's get this thing done. And that's why the push was to get our committee together to do this and discuss it. And the next stage is get the people in place that can do the hearings, and then Dustin can go out and do his job.
Okay, so one last question. So as soon as this is in place, do we have to refile our complaints, or do you have complaints on file that you're going to pick up on and carry on with?
I would like to have refiling of a lot of the complaints.
So we're going to start all over again, just saying. Okay.
There's very few that are open.
Okay. Well, I'm sure every town must have the same few properties that are more concerned about it. Like, yeah,
Very correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, so you're saying that it will take like 2 months before you can have the appeals committee in place?
Our next council meeting is in March. The process of having people sit on this board will go through council, the council decision. Unfortunately, in a township this side, our council meets only once a month. I don't know, I would have to check to see if it's on the agenda for March. The agenda hasn't come out as of yet, so I don't know. I know that everybody involved in this is looking to get this committee put together as quickly as possible. And so, for me to say March, it'll be done, I can't guarantee it, we're trying. If not March, then I think by April, everything will be in place. Now, this committee that will perform the hearings may sit idle for years.
But in fact, it may not. At least it will allow him, at least it will allow the enforcement officer to use that bylaw.
Absolutely.
That's, whether the committee sits is not the point.
Sure.
The point is that he can't use the bylaw.
That's
so
right.
The committee sits.
That's right. When the committee is sitting, obviously somebody has to appeal. If nobody appeals, the committee will never be invited to sit. So I'm sure we have many issues within the township that do need this committee. It does need the property standards to be effective, and I think it's going to happen quite soon. But I can't give a definite date.
I think just to further to Margaret's question, I think Dustin was saying the answer to her question was in 2 parts. And I think that what he was saying was if it's a hoarding situation or a person who's having a mental health issue with dealing with their possessions, I think that you were saying that you give them like the 14-day notice, and in that case they won't appeal, and then, probably they won't appeal. And then in that case, normally what you do is just hire a contractor, et cetera, whatever it is you're going to do to go in and move the things. But if someone has a mental health problem, they're likely not going to do that, right? So you are looking to this committee to give you some tools for that.
Correct.
So you can go to them and say, this is the situation, but this person is having some other difficulties, and you will need the tools.
Correct. I feel that there are some properties where there might be extra help needed to help these individuals clean their properties. I feel that this working group will be a great tool for us to identify those issues and maybe work on different procedures to try to help.
Good. I think that was the other part of Margaret's question.
Yes.
Can I just get some clarification? So, Dustin, you don't presently have an inventory of outstanding complaints
that you haven't been able to address through the Clean Yards bylaw, that you will now start addressing once the property standards appeals committee is in place? Like, you don't have that list of properties that you haven't been able to deal with?
I do have a list, yes, there's very few on it.
Okay, but those won't fall into a black hole.
No, they will not fall into a black hole.
Okay, so,
I'm just saying, starting with the new process, with the new bylaw, it would be good to have a new complaint for that property to follow through properly.
and perhaps to Lori, the communication of the fact that people need to refile these complaints, how do you anticipate that would go forward?
I think there are so few properties that are in that stage that we don't necessarily need new formal complaints. And we're certainly aware of what they are. So maybe explaining a little different than Dustin said, but he's not going to forget about the problem properties that he has. He's going to continue to work on them.
So those ongoing property problems that we have had, and we all know who they are in different towns, after their 14 days are up and nothing has happened, how long before you take action as far as hiring a contractor to clean up?
So are we talking with the property standards in place?
Yeah.
So we would start looking at that option of sending out the notice for the contractors immediately if we know that there aren't going to be any results. And this is different from if we've identified it as a 40 issue too. So if we figure that the property isn't really a 40 issue and isn't something that we should be discussing as a working group, then the invitation for the contractors to do the work would go out immediately after the 14 days.
Yeah, and
also, just to chime in a bit, we still have a procurement policy we have to follow when we hire a contractor. Now, if we find, again, going forward, and again, the committee, that maybe that's too lengthy a process, this is where we can sit down with our councillors and say, maybe this is too long of a process, we should re-look at procurement policy when it comes to these issues so we can speed things up. And this is the whole part of this working group and moving forward.
Okay, but it's like road construction, right? If you have to hire a contractor, you put out the standards, you get 3 quotes, you move on. How long of a time frame are we expecting to see before action takes place? You put out a tender for 3 quotes,
so normally
you give them a deadline to reply back,
yeah,
and after they reply back, you chose who you're going to hire, and how long of a deadline are they going to have to take action?
These things are usually looked at individually, and what we would do in the RFP would we would have all those dates in that, and normally that RFP would be open for 3 weeks. So they would reply to the RFP saying they would start on this date, they would finish on this date, and stuff like that.
So all I'm getting at is within the year type of thing.
Yeah.
It's gonna,
Oh, yeah, we don't.
It's not going to be put back in the top shelf.
Like, we wouldn't write an RFP and say you have to complete this by, 20 or something like that. It would be very specific and
Oh, it sounds promising. It sounds good, better than what we have had in the past.
Certainly, we don't have all the answers, and this committee that we have sitting in front of you here is not going to disband the moment that a judicial committee is formed for the hearing process. This committee will stay together, and this committee will address issues and concerns of the public and help create ways to assist the bylaw department in enforcing these rules. So it is a work in progress. It is a process that's in motion, and well, we're here for another 3 years, and we'll probably be working on this for the next 3 years.
You should have all the yards cleaned up.
Well, we should before. If we don't have to vote for it. So. We're going to stay on top of it. Now, I know I'm not supposed to be asking questions here, but I am going to pose a question I think may be valuable to most people is, Dustin, in the case where you feel there's a hoarding condition, who's going to make the decision that, yes, this is a psychological disorder, or this is a guy with an alcohol or substance abuse program, or this guy just doesn't care and he's not cleaning up his yard? Who's going to make the decision on the mental status of the person that you're going to order cleaned up or have a contractor come in and clean it up? And again, we'll discuss this within the committee, but what avenues do you have any avenues to consult with somebody like a good doctor? Or is there somewhere you can go within the government to get an opinion on that type of thing?
Legislatively, I don't have any direction. It is something we're going to have to discuss in the working group. And that's going to be a procedure we're going to have to develop.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that, and just know that that's a gray area to discover a person's mentality, and that we will pursue that part within the committee.
If I can just touch on that as well. I think that one of the points of having this meeting tonight and inviting Dr. Karagianis was to touch on the fact that we are going to have properties that we are going to be challenged with. And this is something that I'm hoping that we can get together as our working group and perhaps bring Dr. Karagianis in to maybe work with us to find out if there's some way to approach this in an orderly way that we actually can do this and we can give the tools to Dustin to work with. So those may be the properties that are obviously going to be the challenge that you may see a little bit slower progress with. So if you just have a little bit of patience, the other properties, obviously, we're going to get that in place and rolling as quickly as possible. But those ones, I think are going to be a lot more challenging for us until we actually, and I think it's actually, even if we get a process, it's still going to be on an individual basis and how to work through it.
Well, I think that maybe I'll let the young lady talk first because I was going to refer to her comments.
So the 14 days, it takes more than 14 days to empty a house that's stuck to the gill. Believe me, I know. So if progress is being made, the 14 days is not set in stone. That's an ongoing, we're talking type of process. And you're not going to find somebody after 14 days, like even like family of the people, kids of the elderly that are too weak or, too unmotivated, they're just worried about their own health or not at a certain state. So the 14 days is not set in stone.
Utilizing the cooperative approach, the compliance base, not set in stone. That's where meeting with the property owner really gives me a judgment for how much time they're going to need. And as soon as progress is shown, I've been good for allowing extensions. When I'm working with the property owner, as long as they are continually cleaning up, then I'm more than willing to either extend or show some leeway that way.
And also, like, for the elderly, if you can ask them if they have kids that can help them out, that type of thing. That will go a huge way to getting things done, because once they reach a certain age, like my parents died when they were 89, but there was a few years where everything was just getting run down and they were really struggling to walk and get groceries. So, if you involve families, like your kids may not even realize how bad things have gotten with them. Like especially if they're coming over for, all the family get-togethers, they don't come to their place. So they may not even be aware that the situation has really deteriorated. And if you have a crawl space, believe me, you can put a lot of stuff in there. It's not just what's on the counter. There's stuff in every niche and cranny.
I agree. Part of my approach isn't just to tell them to get rid of it. I try to discuss with them different ways and different resources that they can utilize. That's definitely part of my compliance approach that I utilize a lot.
Yeah, and, being able to assist with maybe garbage bins, that type of thing. Like if there's been, say, there's a write-off by the doctor saying that is a mental issue, a handicap, then maybe in that case it can be something through social services that, that they pay for the garbage bin or something that the family member can load up, and it can still be cheaper than hiring a contractor. There may be some ways to work around it.
Yeah,
and the kids would know what's actually of value. Like when I was cleaning up my mother's stuff with the garbage, with her Canadian citizenship, together with the garbage. I had to go page by page by page. I couldn't just dump off, which I would have really liked to have done. I had to go through it, and it was extremely time-consuming. I'm still going through it.
Yeah. those are all strategies we can talk about in the group, for sure.
And we get faced too, I'll go kind of speaking from a lot of experience since probably about 89 dealing with stuff like this. And, we've come across cases, I've come across them before my time here, is where the children have actually abandoned the parents too. And that adds another level of complication to the enforcement people. So, and like even in these cases where some of the, like you said, we're going to let things drop to the hole, that's not going to happen because there's other legislation here that are still pushing forward, like the building code or the interior fire code or stuff like that. Because I mean, Dr. Karagianis here, he said, and Lori mentioned about fires.
Yeah, so it's a serious concern.
For us, it's very serious, and it puts me in a predicament sometimes because under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, I have to take every measure possible to maintain safety for the firefighters. If that means to put an order on a house if it's on fire that we do not go in no matter what, that's a pretty big decision to make. And another comment just on that too is, Dan Ring said about city and rural, I have some colleagues in Toronto Fire that sometimes say I have an advantage over them when it comes to this hoarding situation because the outside is an indicator of what's on the inside. And in the city of Toronto, if you remember about 2 years ago on Michael Avenue, there was a high-rise fire. And it was on the news and there was big black smoke coming out of it, and they couldn't figure out why the heat was increasing and why the smoke was increasing in this little apartment building. And it was a hoarder, and his hoarding was newspapers.
Armin, you've got a question? We're going to have to limit this to a couple more questions, and then we'll
very quickly, and just building on what this young lady said at the end of our aisle here about the financial assistance, because I think the success of this initiative is going to be directly relative to how much money is available to these people. Because I think a lot of people want to clean up, given the choice, they probably don't like living like that, with the exception to the people that Dr. Karagianis identified, the wellness, that's a different story. But I think a lot of people, if they're prompted to, they would be able to find it within themselves to get the energy to do it. But maybe they need to been, as was suggested, and that kind of thing. So I think, there's funding available to people who have failing septic systems. So maybe there's some kind of a program available for this purpose that would facilitate and kind of mitigate costs a little bit for the individuals involved.
Well, that's something we can bring into the committee, Armin, and that's a great point. Of course, there would have to be criteria involved in the process if it's available. And I think we'd probably get social services involved in this part of it, just to find out how it can be done. It's a great idea, and I think it can be done, but because I'm a wealthy individual with a messy lot, I can't be phoning up the township saying, come clean up my lot, and take care of it. So the criteria involved in the discipline of figure out who gets awarded this, certainly we'll discuss within our committee and try and come up with some resolution, some solution that will aid in that. I agree, there's a lot of people that probably would clean up their yards if they had the financial ability to do it. Sometimes people don't realize how expensive it can be to clean up a yard. It can be thousands and thousands of dollars in disposal fees. So I appreciate that. We will certainly look at that avenue as well too.
And more to that, that's something that will be looked at on an individual basis, probably to see if we can't get the community to give us a hand. Again, it's putting the word out there. Perhaps there's a neighbor who does have a problem, who is elderly, would like to have it cleaned up, but doesn't have the resources to even move it, never mind take it to 6 feet. So those are all things that I think will come to us, and hopefully we can help in that way. I'm looking at whether we can have the fees perhaps waived. We can get a neighbor that might want to help with their pickup truck. I mean, these are small communities. Everybody seems to know everybody. So I think getting back a little bit back to having being neighborly and helping, because that has always been a big part of the society up here, in my father's day anyways, where neighbors help each other. they help each other build, they help each other, dispose of things, so if, Joe doesn't have the sources of doing it, or the boat to move it, or the truck to move it, probably his neighbor does. So I'm hoping to try and pull our communities together a little bit to get back to that way of thinking to help as well. So to your point, I mean, it's great, and I think together with trying to find funding and help to the community, we should be able to achieve quite a bit, actually. Dennis?
Yes.
What if it's not their stuff? If the landowner knows it's not their stuff, it belongs to, say, the son or the daughter, and they're too old to clean it up themselves. How do you enforce that?
You mean university kids?
It is the responsibility of the property owner, because you're renting a house or a tenant in a house, and you've made this mess, the onus does fall on the property owner, and it would always revert back to the property owner. I don't know if that helps too much, but I understand exactly what you're saying.
I think, Dennis, so you're referring to it like if your kids were dumping old snowmobiles and things on your property. I think the responsibility, if I'm not mistaken, falls back on the owner of the property. So that's a bit of a touchy situation because it's obviously family. And I think it would be fair warning that if the bylaw enforcement officer comes in and speaks to you and says your property needs to be cleaned up, you would probably have to contact your family member and say, look, this is what has to be done, and if it's not done, it's going to be gone.
Quick with the chief.
Very good.
Yeah.
Councillor Bochek answered that perfectly. The onus does fall on the landowner, and they will be the ones that will have to deal with it.
Two more questions.
Only other question I have is that the process, after you get the appeal committee says, for instance, or the people don't appeal, that the stuff has to be removed. The process to me seems still arbitrary after that. You're sort of saying, oh, well, within 3 weeks we should, probably get an answer. I just think that it's arbitrary. If the process isn't actually written down, like these people, they're going to get a quote, the quotes have to come in 2 weeks after. And then, 30 days after or 45 have to be removed. If you don't have that in your administrative process, then the process is arbitrary, and no one can really track it properly. You can't bring it forward, you can't do anything because it's arbitrary. I just think it would be easier for Dustin, and it's fair to everybody if it's not arbitrary.
Bodies that are Dustin.
Oh, I think.
I get what you're saying.
That's all. Yeah.
According to the property standards bylaw, it's pretty clear. If the day has been set, that is when the cleanup can take place after that. The rest of it would fall to the department's policies or the township's policies. So like the procurement policy that Jim's referring to, that would be just another policy we're going to have to adhere to. So
You have a procurement policy? You actually have one?
Yeah.
Oh, and it is 3 weeks?
For putting tenders out, or?
Yeah, you have an actual policy and date. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I
the
thought.
keeper of that policy is pretty strict.
Is she ever?
No, that's good. I didn't realize they did.
Oh, we need a procurement policy. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay.
We all, go ahead.
This might not matter to anybody else except me, but, do you know when you have to cut your grass, what height does it have to be for people to cut the grass?
6 inches.
Great question.
6 inches.
6 inches?
I think over that is considered a controversial.
Okay. So, I know people in the town that have cut the grass because they've been told to cut the grass.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a piece of property that belongs to the township, okay? And they decide, everything looks beautiful, everybody on the whole street has cut their grass, and it looks great. But there's 3 feet all the way down the road that's like this high,
I knew I
and I
should have
think...
cut this off minutes ago.
And I know that belongs to the road, right? So it has nothing to do with Dustin, because you told me that before, that it belongs to the road. And they won't do anything about it unless it is obstructing the view of people trying to get around the corner. But then why do the property owners have to cut their lawn if the township doesn't have to cut the lawn on the side that looks like crap? Even if it's not...
It's gotta be a district road.
Even if it's not obstructing the traffic, it still looks like crap because everybody's yard is cut, but this, and they refuse to cut it because, well, it's on a hill, or it's, it's not my property here.
It's a great question, Pauline. I'm glad you brought it up. So maybe this is something, because you guys probably don't really have an answer to that one. Or do you? No.
We brought the wrong people.
But you know what, it's maybe...
Light it on fire, then we'll deal with it.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can bring that one up to council. We'll make a note of that and just bring that actually up, that it was brought to our attention.
Till the end?
Thank you, that was a great conclusion question, actually. I just want to say thank you very much for coming out tonight. This is really helpful for us to go forward with the working group to, implement some of your ideas and so on. There is a bit of a form that Dustin has here. Dustin has here. If you can take just a minute, it's 2 or 3 questions that'll really help us if you want to make some comments, we'll push it forward with all the other ideas. I'd also just like to take the opportunity to thank our panel, Dr. Karagianis, for coming in and sharing his expertise with us. It's really valuable for us, and to Dustin for your presentation tonight. And safe travels to everyone.
And don't forget to roll up your room.
Yeah.
I threw mine away. I thought we didn't get another garbage.
Okay.
That didn't really go.
You know what, I'm going home and self-reflect.
Look at that half.
Well,